Free speech. We in the United States historically have long appreciated this very important First Amendment right. And yet, folks, it is under attack big time, especially for those who are publicly preaching and sharing the gospel. We're going to talk about this with our chief counsel attorney, Kevin Schneider, in the second half of the show, and some of the active cases that we've taken on and are taking on presently in the defense of free speech and people's opportunity to share their faith. But the first half of the show, I want to talk to someone who I really respect, someone who has been a part of the Pacific Justice Institute indirectly, Myron Steeves, who is the dean of Trinity Law School, where we have our Southern California office located. Myron, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to join you again.
Now, before we get into some of these constitutional theories and concepts and attacks on our courts, and what's taking place, I think, has some great, fantastic things about it, also some very threatening things coming down the pike. I want to talk a little bit about Trinity Law School. Just a little bit of a plug here. I want people to understand what makes Trinity Law School so unique and something that people should consider if they want to go to a truly Christian law school.
Well, Trinity Law School is a rare institution in legal education in that it cares deeply about the values behind the law. It's not well understood in the larger public, but most law schools have an agenda that seeks to undermine an understanding of the true basis of law, and Trinity is different. It's cut in a different direction, and the education that students receive at Trinity is a balanced understanding of why the law is what the law is, how it honors God, how law can drift away to dishonoring God, and how to find a through course of truly pursuing justice in the way that only an understanding of God's world can do. And Trinity has been doing this for 35 years and has transformed the lives of many students who have gone out and have changed the world in unique ways through the law. Yeah,
in fact, one of our attorneys went to Trinity Law School. And so I'm very, very appreciative and respectful of what you guys are doing. And I like the fact that so many law schools are completely just severing the foundation of what law school is about and the origins of law, the understandings of the laws of nature and nature's God, Blackstone, just the history of the development of Western law. You, in your law school, you don't try to sweep that under the rug. You embrace it. And it really helps students understand what law is, where it came from, and why these foundations are so important for the preservation of liberty as we know it. Now, the bigger picture now, we've got some challenges taking place here in the United States. In a good way, we've had what I call historic revolution taking place in our federal courts. In a positive way, discuss some of this revolution, as many people call it, that's taking place in our federal courts.
Well, there's been a crack in the law over the decades between those that see the reason for law is to pursue justice, to advance a morally strong culture, and those that have sought to use it as an agenda to try to advance some kind of often anti-Christian, anti-theistic viewpoint. There's been a real battle, and it shows up over critical issues that have divided the culture. And that battle very often, when it can't be addressed legislatively, is addressed in the courts with so much at stake in who gets to be part of that critical decision-making body that makes up our entire federal court system.
Right. Now, we have two basic ways of thinking about the function of a judge. On one hand, you have judicial activists who say, hey, might is right, who's in power wins. We're going to change and make the Constitution say what we want it to because we just want to get to our agenda, get things done. Forget the legislature, forget the will of the people. We're just going to be judicial activists. And we've seen that. But there's the other philosophy, one that I am very akin to, is one that respects the original intent of the Constitution, strict scrutiny as to what was it intended to say when it was written. And let's respect that and let the people amend the Constitution, not judicial activists. We have seen a lot of judges appointed in the last 2 years in particular in historic proportions that are the latter. That is, that respect the Constitution of the United States and original intent. How important is that, and how dramatic is that?
It can be very important. One of the founding principles of our country is to not have a government that is too powerful. And in some ways, the court has the potential to be the most powerful branch in that federal judges are appointed for life, so they're not accountable to the electorate. And they can do great things either for good or for evil if they have unfettered power. The idea behind originalism is that you control what judges do. They should operate in a very narrow area, only consider matters that come before them, and they should respond not with creative ideas about justice, but rather ideas that are rooted in the text of the Constitution.
Yes.
The other side of the picture are those who think that the Constitution doesn't address the issues they want to address, so they go cross-country instead of sticking to the path and try to follow their general principles of justice. The risk there is, whose justice do they follow? Often it ends up being a very highly personal, idiosyncratic approach to getting things done, where one advantage of originalism is it's predictable. You look at the text of the Constitution, and that gives you a very strong sense of where that judge is going to go.
Right. And also, businesses, from an economic perspective, there's more certainty when you have a court system with justices that are looking at the law. What does it say on its face? And so others, as far as companies, industries, from an economic perspective, have more certainty, and more certainty is more confidence for investing. And one problem a lot of third world countries have is that they don't have certainty of law, and therefore there is a hesitancy for people wanting to invest in their country because of corruption or arbitrary nature or corruption of a judicial system. So we have an incredible court system. We have things shifting in the right direction, I believe, with more and more justices, historic proportions. The Supreme Court, I think, is the most pro-religious freedom Supreme Court we've had possibly in history. We have more circuit court judges appointed historically that respect the Constitution, same in the district court levels. And yet there are some who are really upset about this, where they're talking about possibly flooding the Supreme Court, maybe increasing the numbers on the Supreme Court, depending on who is elected in the next presidential election or elections in the future. Is there a problem with that mindset of, hey, we don't like the fact that this is the majority on the Supreme Court, so if our group gets in power, we're going to push and have more justices put on the Supreme Court so we can shift it back to the other direction. Is there a problem with that?
I think one thing that should tip the hand of those that advance this, that there is a problem, is that's never presented as an objective ideal, that somebody thinks 9 justices just isn't enough. It is always the party that has the least traction in the court that advances that. And this has been true on both sides of the spectrum. This is not a left-right issue. It's a matter of who's in power, that those who see their numbers on the court are thin tend to advance this idea. But there's no objective logic in the thought that 15 justices are going to make better decisions than 9.
Right. Well, what's dangerous about it, though? So it goes from 9 to 15. Long term, is there any problem with our society just adding on justices to the Supreme Court?
It becomes a little bit unwieldy and can look more like a legislative body than a court. In reality, the judges don't interact all that much before they make decisions. They pass things by memos between departments. But there is a degree of collegiality with 9 that you would lose if it was nearly double that number.
Right. And also, what about the risk of the courts and the Supreme Court in particular no longer being a third branch of government, but effectively just reflecting whoever's in office in the other 2 branches? I mean, it sort of just becomes sort of if you have someone in the White House, you have someone in the legislature, and they're on your side, then you can just swing the Supreme Court in whatever direction you want, and they just simply reflect the other two branches, as opposed to really being independent and standing on its own, holding the other two accountable.
It's popularly thought that that's actually what the court does, that it is purely a political body. And I'm enough of an optimist in objective views of justice to think that we can have justices who deliberate and try to find what is truly the right result consistent with the Constitution. In order to do that, the conversations about politicizing the court need to be toned down rather than inflamed. And all the plans to advance the court tend to want to inflame that rather than reduce them. I should add that over the long course of history, the court has mostly operated in a way that doesn't attract a lot of attention. Even today, most of the cases that come before the court are decided 9-0 or very close to it. They decide about 60 cases a year. 6 or 7 of those are the controversial ones that make the paper.
Right.
There have been a couple of times in history when it has gotten highly charged and politicized. The first time, very obviously, was over the slavery issue, where who went on the court was determinative of the direction of the country. It happened again at the turn of the 20th century over economics, and it happened in 1973 over abortion, where in these times in history, spread out over long periods, a single issue becomes a litmus test issue.
Right.
But the long haul of history suggests that you can have wise, intelligent justices who decide things in a fair way. And tampering with that should be done with a great deal of caution.
Right. And hopefully those justices are appointed who all have the merits to be there and are chosen based on their merits and not something else, which I think could actually weaken the credibility of the courts. But I think historically you're right. Basically, those are the kind of justices we've had, and we've been really blessed, I think, to have that in our nation, in our judicial branch.
I think one thing that troubles people, especially with the lifespan of judges being longer now than it was 200 years ago, is they can be on there for a very long time. And there is something entirely random about appointing justices only when somebody ages out or dies. See, we end up with a situation like Jimmy Carter served a 4-year term and didn't get to appoint anybody on the court because the court was really healthy at the time that he came into office. Others get to appoint many in a short period of time. There are alternatives to that being suggested in this election campaign. For example, you could have a constantly changing number of justices, but allow each president to appoint a new justice every 2 years. That would at least have a court that follows current political trends rather than one that's based upon actuarial tables.
Very good. Well, these are some interesting things to think about, and I hope people do think about them and understand the long-term ramifications when we entertain thoughts of radically changing the number on the Supreme Court or our federal courts in a way that is political, but in the long term could really have a serious price to pay in terms of the judicial branch itself. Myron Steves, thank you so much for being on the show, and keep up the great work there at Trinity Law School.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I love working with PJI, and it's always good to interact with you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
So my name is Adelmo. I'm 33 years old. I was born and raised in Brazil. Came to America 2 years ago. I've been living here with my wife. Got married 2 years ago. I came to faith in Jesus Christ around 17 years ago. I was living a terrible life in drugs and crime. Praise God, I had people coming and telling me about the faith in Jesus Christ. I understand that when you have something very good, you want to share it with people, especially if it is something that people need. And the gospel is something that people need. November 2015, it was a remarkable date for me. When I was out there preaching, it was in front of a gas station. People didn't like the message and they called the police. The police officer came and I kept asking him, what law have I broken? What crime have I committed? And he didn't have an answer to my question. He just wanted my ID, and I was trying to make sure that I was going to give him my identification as soon as I understood the crime I was committing. I stood my ground, and he stood his ground, and well, he had the handcuff, so he put the handcuff on me. It didn't make me afraid or anything. I was actually willing to be arrested if that's what it takes for me to be able to have my faith proclaimed. Even the Lord Jesus Christ himself was arrested for preaching the word that he preached. So I don't expect people to be behaving or treating me any better than what they did with the Lord. When I was arrested, I didn't have any legal representation. They said I was going to spend 365 days in jail, pay a fine of $1,000, and I was going to be deported back to Brazil without my wife. And I trusted God that we were going to win, and praise God. They never prosecuted it, so they dropped the charges 2 days before the trial.
We at the Pacific Justice Institute are handling more and more cases just like Adamos, where people are being victimized because of intolerance because of their faith. We're committed to defending the fundamental civil rights of individuals, and we're sort of unique in that we work hard across America to make sure that no one is ever left on the side of the road. No case is too small for the Pacific Justice Institute. And folks, if you'd like to support the Pacific Justice Institute, actually become a part of our team, it's real easy. Just go to our website. It's pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. And there you can sign up to be a one-time or a monthly supporter of the Pacific Justice Institute. Become a part of our team. We do all our work without charge. We have over 40 cases in active litigation as I speak right now. And we don't charge for these cases. We do it out without charge, and we're able to do that because of people out there like you that believe in what we do and feel called and respond to that calling to be a part of our team and our ministry. So thank you so much. And while you're at our website, by the way, you can also sign up to get our Legal Insider newsletter. It's once a week. It's short, but it gives you some insider information, oftentimes that we need prayer for. So that's a wonderful resource. Take a look at that. And then we have other resources as well. For example, information about how you can legally evangelize in the workplace, how you can evangelize, live your faith in public schools, how you can protect your children from being taken by social workers. Very substantive material. It's all without charge. Go to our website, PJI, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. Now, we have with us on the line to talk about some growing cases that we have involving ministers, pastors, preachers who are being criminally arrested and prosecuted throughout the United States. And to talk with us about these cases, and one in particular out of Florida, we have with us on the line our Chief Counsel, Kevin Schneider. Kevin, thank you for being on the program.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, now, Kevin, what states do we actually have cases in dealing with people who want to openly preach the gospel in public places, share the good news of Christ in public places, and are dealing with criminal charges being brought against them? What states are we talking about here? Is it just California? What are we talking about?
We currently have these types of cases in 5 states, California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Florida. And we've recently closed out cases in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and in the Lone Star state of Texas, 2 of those which you handled.
Yes, I had to fly out there personally to San Antonio, another case in El Paso, dealing with people who love Jesus, men who are ministers. One is his Master's of Divinity from Southern Baptist Seminary, preaching the gospel, apologetics. He was criminally prosecuted, hanging over his head for 9 months. And then we finally got the charges dropped about 2 weeks before trial. But these are very time-consuming. They're very intensive. And my understanding, Kevin, is that we at Pacific Justice Institute are now known throughout the country as the organization to call for representation from these ministers who are being criminally prosecuted, and partly because one thing that makes us unique is that we don't just take on high-profile cases. We work hard to make sure that no one is left on the side of the road, literally in this case, no one is left on the side of the road, that everyone gets representation and protection. We don't just cherry pick. And that's one reason why we handle so many of these cases, because they can't get help anywhere else. And yet we have a case matter, and you said in Florida. I want to talk about that. What's going on in Florida? I know you're handling this personally on behalf of this client for Pacific Justice Institute. What's going on in Florida?
Yes, well, the client was on a public sidewalk in front of a high school. He waited until the dismissal bell had rung in the afternoon, and after it rang, he began preaching the word. When a high school principal called the police, he was arrested and charged on 2 misdemeanor counts of trespass and disturbing the peace.
Okay, now this has taken place. He's being prosecuted for trespass. Did he actually go on campus?
No. The police report initially stated that he, you get this, stepped from the sidewalk with his right foot on the grass. And then we thought, well, maybe that happened. Nonetheless, it didn't seem like a very intrusive matter. Anyway, last week we received the body cam footage and discovery and found that he did not even step on the grass at all. But that doesn't matter. In Florida, they have a rather strange trespassing law that gives a 500-foot perimeter around a school so that a person cannot come within 500 feet from 1 hour before school starts until 1 hour after school unless they have lawful business. So under Florida law, it doesn't matter whether he stepped on the grass or not. He trespassed 499 feet before that, according to their law.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm a little annoyed with the fact that they lied. They made up information that did not happen. They did not see. That bothers me. That vitriol and that kind of an attitude of despising this man for preaching the gospel enough that they would lie and make up information. Real quick, what's the school district again, just for the record?
It's in Fort Myers, Florida. Fort Myers, Florida.
Fort Myers, Florida. Fort Myers, Florida. This is the tactic that they used. Now, as far as that law, that ordinance that deals with the 500 feet, area where he can't be that get close to campus, etc. What's our defense in that regard? Because that just seems so overly burdensome with regards to free speech rights. It doesn't sound like it's necessary. What's our defense?
Well, our defense is that under the statute, he has to have lawful business. Our position is that delivering a speech, leafleting, or holding a sign on a public sidewalk is an exercise in the right of free speech, and in this case, freedom of religion, and that exercising free speech on a public sidewalk is always lawful business under our Constitution.
Right. And also the fact that they would make that distinction and say, okay, if you're selling something, then that's fine. You can approach the kids, solicit, sell. But if you're not selling anything, you're instead not asking for anything, you're not selling anything, you're just wanting to share the good news of Christ and the gospel. Oh, that's different. We need to protect the children from that, but we don't need to protect the children from vendors pushing goods, pushing things on the kids for a profit. That sounds so twisted to me. I think that's actually going to, in the end, be to our advantage, the fact that they have the audacity to make that kind of distinction.
Yeah, and also they've also written into a distinction that if you're involved in protests, and I think what they meant was, for example, labor protests, you could do that. And so essentially, if he would have held a sign that said shorter hours and more money, that would have been okay. But if he writes "Jesus saves, repent, the end is near" on a sign, then that wouldn't be free speech. He would still be prosecuted.
Yeah, and you know what's a real shame about that is that I've seen public school teacher, union members, public school teachers who are very in your face. They're rude, crude, very insensitive to parents wanting to drop their kids off. They don't care, screaming, yelling. And so they've got that ability to be there close to the school, to intimidate parents, to maybe make a child feel uncomfortable or cry. They're protected because of a union lobby to be the thugs that they are at times like this. And yet at the same time, people who love the Lord, who love these kids, who put the kids first, who are there just pouring out in a heart with no selfish ambitions, they're treated differently. They're treated like there's have some kind of toxic about them, and they're required to be 500 feet away. I think that's very unreasonable, not to mention, of course, unconstitutional. Now, Kevin, we're not charging, are we, for this individual and his representation?
Well, PGA only charges $1 for representation on these cases.
Yeah, just $1, and that's it. And we do that actually for legal reasons, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we had our way, we wouldn't charge anything, but for legal reasons, we have to charge $1. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, but effectively, that's it. So even if we have to take a case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, that's it. We'll only charge our client $1. That's it. And I'm really glad we do that. A lot of these people in full-time ministry, say most of them, I mean, they don't have a lot of discretionary money. Kevin, if we didn't step in and represent them, these who want to share the gospel and reach out, and there's so many stories where they've been able to reach out to kids who are in trouble, who need that hope, and who are depressed, and they come to Christ, and it's awesome. But if we didn't represent them, what would happen to this gentleman who has these criminal charges brought against him?
Well, he would be given over to the public defender to handle this, and there's a lot of good people who serve in that capacity, but this is some sophisticated areas of, as you know, constitutional law. The First Amendment is a esoteric type of affirmative defense, and and we have to file motions, and most public defenders are not ginned up on that sort of thing.
Right. No, they're not. And oftentimes, I've discovered they often will push the client just to settle. Well, here's a plea bargain. Just spend so many months behind bars, and that's it. And they'll drop the charges or X, Y, and Z. And you don't have justice there. Instead, you just have something that prevents them from doing God's calling. Maybe they, are prevented from even preaching in the future. This is not the kind of representation they need. They need someone who has expertise, who shares their resolve, appreciates their First Amendment rights, and is willing to go to the mat for them all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's the Pacific Justice Institute. Kevin, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. And folks out there, I encourage you to pray for this case and pray for this evangelist, this minister who's reaching out to those kids with love and hope and truth. Kevin, once again, thanks for being on the show, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about here. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.